everybody. Welcome to another edition of Research Files. I'm your host, Gary Waddell. Thanks for being with us. Tonight we're going to talk about the Hadza tribe of Tanzania, East Africa. We'll learn how and why police departments work to reduce crime and disorder. We'll also talk about the ecology of high-temperature habitats in the world, both in the western United States and in China. So we'll begin with that. We're going to talk a little bit with Brian Hedlund first about research at the university. I understand that you are a Research Division faculty fellow. Tell us what that means.
That's right, yeah. So that means that I work with the Vice President for Research and Economic Development, and I do basically anything that I can with him to try to stimulate research on campus. So I'm involved in a number of different committees. We're trying to find out how to incentivize research on campus, how to get faculty to balance that load of teaching and service and research, but to stimulate the research side, because that's what we're interested in. Really just anything we can to try to stimulate research on campus.
How does research benefit a school?
The research benefits the school in a lot of ways. Number one, I probably don't have to say, not everything revolves around money, but a lot does revolve around money.
Right, I would imagine, yes.
And so this research is a revenue stream that's independent of the state, mostly. And so it's a way for us to bring in research dollars to do exciting work. And those dollars that we bring in not only fuel the research that's going on, but also the university captures some of that money that it can use strategically to build all sorts of different programs.
Plus it attracts people that do research and also can be faculty members, right?
That's right, exactly. Yeah. And I can't forget to mention students, of course, because we're at a university. And my experience, and I think most of the experiences out there, is that the students want to be involved with people that are doing the research, people that actually write the textbooks, do the research, bring in the knowledge that goes into the textbooks they're reading. Those people have a much deeper understanding of what that textbook is about. And research also gives a lot of opportunities for students to actually get their hands wet, to get involved and to actually be a part of the research, of what they're reading in the textbook instead of just reading it passively. They come out, they're part of the game and actually bring knowledge in, and they understand it on a whole different level that way.
Okay. You also are part of the faculty, administer the Faculty Opportunity Program. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a strategic reinvestment plan. As I mentioned, when we bring in research dollars, some amount of that money is captured by the administration, and this is an injection of that money back into faculty. So it goes back to faculty on a competitive basis, and the faculty can propose new types of research and go out there and start new programs, and it's a good way to stimulate research. That program, we've been running it for 5 years or something like that, and we've had about an 8-to-1 return on investment.
Wow.
So when we capture a dollar and give it to a faculty member, we get at least 8 back.
Wonderful.
So last year we invested about $500,000, and so if that 8-to-1 works, we should get about a couple million back. Okay,
let me talk a little bit about your research in particular. You work with you do high temperature research, microorganisms and all. This is basically hot springs, both in the water and on land. You've been to China. You've got 6 universities there and 8 universities here cooperating. What are you learning, or what are you trying to learn?
Yeah, so I have a lot of different projects in my lab, and this is the biggest one that I have going. As you said, it has a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different universities. This one is funded by the National Science Foundation. They have a program called PIRE. It's Partnerships for International Research and Education. And so this means that we have all the high expectations of the National Science Foundation for research excellence, but we also have to engage with international partners. And so these partners could be anywhere. In our case, they're in China, which surprises a lot of people because people are used to thinking about us competing with China in science and technology. But we're the 2 biggest economies in the world, right?
Oh, wow.
And so, why should we always be competing? We can work together too. And so this is a nice team of people. We get together, we work together. We're working on the largest geothermal system in southwest China.
Temperatures of?
Boiling, up to
Wow.
boiling.
And things live in that water?
Absolutely, they love it.
Wow.
This is their home, right? So you and I have our home.
Right.
And
72, please.
Exactly.
Fahrenheit.
Exactly. 72 Fahrenheit. These guys like 72 Celsius, which
wow.
is some of them are growing up above boiling, so it's above 212 Fahrenheit or 100 Celsius.
Microbial dark matter. Sounds pretty science fiction-y.
It is science fiction-y. So microbiology is kind of a young science. It's about 130 years old in its major form. And most of it has focused on cultures of microbes that can be grown in the lab. People hear about yogurt cultures.
Right.
Well, we have cultures that we grow in our lab. And when we can grow them in our lab, we can study them in all kinds of detail. What they eat, what they breathe, what enzymes they make, what chemicals they make, what they can do for us. But it turns out that for a long time, we didn't know that we were missing a lot of the microbes out there. Mm. And it turns out that there are about 80% of the major evolutionary lineages of microbes that are out there in nature, and nobody has yet figured out how to grow them. Wow. So they're kind of invisible. This is where the dark matter analogy comes from. And so what we've essentially done is use a forensic approach, just like you'd use to find the killer, right? So we go out and we get DNA from habitats, and without growing the organisms, we take that DNA, we sequence that DNA, and we study it, and we can do all sorts of things with that. I'm still unsatisfied with just having DNA, so we're right now really pushing other technologies to try to understand what they're doing. One thing we do is we give them isotope labeled food, right?
Okay.
And so then we can look and see if they take that food up. So we can do all sorts of experiments with them without bringing them into the lab.
Fascinating stuff. Brian, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
It was wonderful. I look forward to hearing more about your research.
It's fun chatting.
Okay, have a good one.
Yep.
We will next have Bill Sousa. When we come back, please stay with us.
You always made sure I brushed my teeth.
You told me that smart was cool.
You always told me to dream big.
To all of those parents who took the time to make raising their children their most important job, we'd like to say,
thank you.
Thank you.
From the bottom of my heart, thanks, Mom and Dad.
This message is brought to you by the U.S. Air Force.
At what age is the color that your skin was meant to be no longer beautiful? Every year, millions of young women try to change the skin they were born with and say they'd die for darker skin. Sadly, some actually do. Melanoma is the second most common cancer in teens and young adults, and one person dies from melanoma every hour. Change your thinking, not your skin. Stop tanning. Learn more at spotskincancer.org. A message from the American Academy of Dermatology.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Ready or not, here I come.
Take time to be a dad today.
Daddy, I'm gonna find you.
We are back with an associate professor of criminal justice at UNLV, but he's also the head of the Center for Crime and Justice Policy. Welcome to, thank you very much for being with us, Bill. We appreciate it.
Here.
And tell us what the Center for Crime and Justice Policy is about.
At the center, we use applied research to inform criminal justice policy. So we work very closely with local and state police agencies, probation and parole, other criminal justice agencies, social service agencies, and community groups to help advance research here at UNLV. We're involved in a number of projects. We're involved in projects related to prisoner reentry, school violence prevention, policing technologies, and also, the center is really a training facility of sorts. We work with a number of undergraduate students, a number of graduate students, and really in the same way that medical schools train physicians by practicing medicine under supervision, we train future social scientists by having them practice research under supervision.
One of the things you mentioned there was the advances in technology, and one of them obviously has been the body cams and the dash cams that we've seen video of. I mean, when we tape this show, it's a couple of days after people in Chicago lost their job because the dash camera came out of the shooting death of a young boy in Chicago that happened 13 months, I think, ago, and the camera video is just coming out. How is that type of technology changing both policing and the communities?
Well, in very important ways, the technology allows us to see, it allows police work to become more transparent to citizens. And we know that people are very supportive of body camera technology because of that transparency. They feel that it will help to protect citizens against police misconduct, and indeed it will help protect officers from false allegations of misconduct. So it's very important, but we don't really understand how it might impact the interactions between police and citizens. For example, we know that while people are very supportive of the technology in terms of transparency, people are very concerned about who might get access to that video.
As a former member of the media, I know that we want all the video we can get.
Right.
And sometimes witnesses and people don't.
That's right. People are concerned that victims and witnesses might be a little more reluctant to approach police because their statements will be recorded. So these types of interactions, we're not sure how body cameras or dash cameras might impact these types of interactions. And also, while people are supportive of the cameras in the interest of transparency, because they're reluctant to have just anyone have access to the videos, it points to an interesting contradiction. We want more transparency. The body cameras can give us transparency, but we don't want just anyone to have access to them.
We've seen a lot of them, and not just on the television show Cops, but I mean we've seen a lot of this video. It makes it seem that there's a lot more incidents like the ones we've seen in Chicago and in New York and places like that. Are there more incidents now, or are we just seeing more of them?
Well, it's an interesting question, and there's actually a fair amount of evidence to suggest that policing has become better over the last 20 or 30 years. Police are much better at addressing citizen concerns. They've become much better at issues related to community policing. And indeed, when it comes to use of force, and especially use of deadly force, evidence suggests that police are less likely to use deadly force now than over the past couple of decades. Now, of course, you wouldn't think
it's going to wind up on the front page in the lead of the news.
Right. And of course, one of the theories behind that is because of technologies like cell phone video, social media, people have become more aware of these types of incidents. And so the increased awareness has given the impression that these types of activities are on the rise, when actually the evidence suggests that policing has become better over time.
I would imagine a lot of research is being done on this. I know you're doing some of it here at UNLV. Are there areas that just jump out at you and say, we've got to know more about this?
Well, certainly. I think we pointed to a few of them. We don't really know how it will impact the interaction between police and citizens, these cameras. We've been sold on the idea that the body cameras are going to help, and they may very well in very important ways, but they're not the be-all that ends all either. Two people can look at the same video and interpret it two very different ways. Okay. So just because body camera video will give us more information, but that doesn't mean it will give us all of the answers. And I think that's something we really need to take a look at as we move forward with the research.
Bill Sousa, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being with us.
Great to be here.
Okay, we'll be right back.
Help support the Breast Cancer Patient Education Act, a bill that will help make sure women facing a mastectomy are told all their options about breast reconstruction. Visit brawdayusa.org for more information.
In Vietnam, we took care of each other.
In combat, you look out for your battle buddy.
I'd do anything for my unit.
When things get tough, it's great to know
somebody's there for you.
Every step of the way.
DAV stands behind America's veterans to make their transition back home easier, with free services and help getting the benefits they've earned. Help us fulfill the promise to our men and women who served. Go to DAV.org to learn more.
Welcome back. We are joined now by Alyssa Crittenden. She is the Assistant Professor of Anthropology, Lindsay Assistant Professor of Anthropology at UNLV. First, tell us what that means. And welcome.
Thank you very much. So there were a couple professorships on campus that were funded by the Lindsay Institute here at UNLV, and much of the monies went towards actually supporting UNLV research. So I was very lucky enough to be the Lindsay Assistant Professor of Anthropology in Liberal Arts, and it has really greatly influenced my ability to conduct my research. So my graduate students and I have been able to do wonderful things. So really the Lindsay Institute has really helped us out in terms of getting our research done.
And in addition to being a professor, you also are doing this research project studying bacteria in the belly. I gotta read this. Bacteria in the bellies of the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, one of the few remaining hunter-gatherer populations in the world. Tell us about them and what you're studying.
Yes, well, I've worked with the Hadza, which is one of the last groups of foraging peoples on the planet. So they're one of the last groups of people that are still collecting wild foods for the majority of their diet. So I've worked in East Africa for about 10 years, and I direct my field site there. And much of my work looks at the evolution of human nutrition and looks at food and nutrition in an evolutionary context, really trying to piece together changes in social behavior and reproduction that really made us human. And one of the research projects that I recently worked on with a group of international collaborators was looking at the gut microbiome of the Hadza foragers. So bacteria in a different sense in comparison to Brian's work, but really, by cell number, each one of us is more microbial than human. So we were really interested in researching the gut bacteria of a population that is still living almost completely off the land, and kind of looking at that and comparing it to a Western context in terms of looking at, we were primarily interested in looking at diversity. So kind of getting an idea of what is there and hopefully figuring out what these bugs are doing. So looking at these commensal bacteria and figuring out how they relate to the food that these people are eating.
Us laymen sitting on the sidelines would say, you know, lifespans have gone from 30 years, 40 years to 75 to 80 years. Right. Is that not what you're finding in this group?
That is very true. Life expectancy has, over the course of human evolution, of course, increased.
And we, of course, attribute that to food,
right.
Good food. But.
So a lot of what my research looks at is kind of looking at the types of food in deep evolutionary time that helped make us human. So kind of looking at the way that food interacts with human biology and changes in human anatomy and changes in our social behavior that are mapped onto types of food sharing, for instance, or different types of foods that we need to grow and maintain these really large brains we carry around. So a lot of my work has looked at particular foods, like, for instance, the role of honey in human evolution, and how that has led to changes potentially in brain growth. So the brain is an obligate glucose consumer, which means we need sugar, right? Where would our ancestors have found ready, accessible amounts of glucose? Well, one hypothesis is by hacking into beehives. So by working with foragers and looking at their diet and the way that they map themselves onto the land, we can start to piece together some of these puzzles, these human evolutionary puzzles.
On this night on the Science Channel, I think they're beginning their series about extinction.
Right.
And I'm sure that this tribe is getting forces from all around that are causing it problems too.
Right.
What is their future and how does it affect us?
It's a good question, Gary.
We've only got 20 seconds.
Oh, great. Okay, so the quick version is, you know, they are one of the last foraging peoples on the planet, and so a lot of attention is being placed right now on the land rights issues that are facing the Hadza because population is growing globally, but the space where we live is not. So what that means is that many different tribes are coming into Hadza territory, and we will see within our lifetime if these populations are still able to forage. Many of them are transitioning out of the bush, and hopefully the ones that choose to live in the bush and maintain this lifestyle collecting wild foods, hopefully they will be able to do so.
And you'll let us know.
I will keep you posted.
Thank you, Alyssa. This has been very interesting. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me.
We'll be back with our final guest in just a minute.
I remember the moment.
I'll never forget that moment.
That changed my life.
At that moment, it hit me. This is why I joined the Guard. We're soldiers, always ready to protect our country. But we've also got communities. Family, friends, neighbors who count on us. I couldn't believe it. I just saved a life to somebody from my hometown.
See what it means to be a citizen soldier at NationalGuard.com.
Oh, hey, bud.
Oh.
Where are you headed?
Just gonna hang out.
It's a school night. With Gary and Todd?
Yeah?
Not sure about those two. I've been meaning to ask you. This is tougher than I thought. Is there any drinking going on in this crowd?
No.
I hope not, because alcohol can lead you to say things and do things that you really wish you hadn't. Isn't this what you're supposed to say?
I know.
So if any of your buddies ever pressure you to take a drink, just tell them you promised your dad you wouldn't. I'd do anything to keep you safe.
Okay, I will.
I hope this is working.
I promise. Love you too, Dad.
They really do hear you.
Ryan.
Yeah?
So start the conversation even before they're teenagers.
Good idea.
For tips on what to say, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Thanks. We're back. Our final guest this evening, Associate Professor of Anthropology, Peter Gray. Welcome, Peter. Thank you for being with us.
Glad to be here.
You do research on all sorts of things, but the dynamics of human sexuality, parenting, family, that's a pretty wide topic. What are some of the things you're looking into?
Looking into a lot of things. I think it all integrates under reproduction broadly. Why? I think reproduction is incredibly important. You know, if I think about what gives meaning to my life, what many people would say, it's often their partners, their kids, and so forth, family members. So as part of this package of things, then, I especially like to look at fathers and the variable roles of fathers, and even extended kin, we could say now, including pets, becoming more and more often involved in our families. So this, underneath this umbrella, we can actually do all kinds of things.
The role of parents, the roles of fathers and mothers have changed a lot over the fairly recent years, haven't they?
They have, yeah, and we can show that in recent data. If you look across the last generation or two, you can see that the amount of time fathers spend in direct contact with kids has increased. We're more apt to be changing the diapers or bedside at the time of a birth, for example, and you can show that with data. And then it also raises questions why. Why are we seeing changes in fathering? And that's a complicated but interesting question. Also, tying into this is why we have variable roles of fathers. So I do research in the US, but also in the Caribbean, including Jamaica and St. Kitts, where some of the questions that I and colleagues ask are, why are fathers so variably involved? Some hugely invested, others who live maybe apart from a child at the time of a birth in a visiting relationship, we call them, and maybe have more distant relationships with both the child's mother as well as the child, and how does that play out for those fathers themselves? So interesting kinds of questions.
I assume it does, but where you are in the world, I'm sure makes a difference in the relationship.
It does, absolutely. So on one hand, it's just interesting that we as a species have men like us who are invested as fathers. Again, if we look at most of the mammals we're likely to encounter, like the bighorn sheep around here, forget it. So that is part of a story in itself. But also then, why are we so cross-culturally variable in terms of the investment of fathers is a complementary question, and something anthropologists like myself long have been interested in. And doing work in the Caribbean ties into some of these themes, of which relationships in these kind of visiting relationships are certainly part of a discussion about variable father roles there. And some parallels to the U.S., but I think often also, as we're seeing around Europe, U.S., and so forth, more and more fathers, for economic reasons, may be struggling to make ends meet and to be viable partners, and this in turn contributes to why they may be variably involved as well.
You mentioned animals. I have a dog that I adopted from rescued, and he was basically feral when I got him, and I've turned him into what I would refer as my proudest accomplishment in my life. But he is a wonderful dog. But that relationship is very important, right? With a pet, or for a lot of people.
It is. So the first animal domesticated is
The dog?
The dog, yes. And there's debate about when and how, but nonetheless, there's no doubt that the dog was the first domesticated. Dogs are still nonetheless viewed differently around the world, of course. That's part of the interesting cross-cultural variation, that viewers have probably traveled and seen dogs wandering in streets elsewhere, or maybe consumed some places still. Yes. At the same time, you can see them readily indulged in other places. So why is this? Again, places like the U.S., we are seeing evidence of dogs more and more often being viewed as family members. Just recently, the 50th anniversary of the Snoopy holiday show appeared, and I thought back, Snoopy, do you remember when Snoopy slept outside?
Right, yeah. Well,
my dogs would have frozen last night.
Oh, I know, yeah. Mine's under the covers in the bed. There's no question about that. That is his spot. I'm just lucky to be there with him,
And that's part of how things have changed.
And I say, do you want to go home to your house? Not my house, but your house. So all of that has changed. What do people get from animals that is so important?
It's a good question. I think part of it is that we've evolved this capacity to care for other things. Often that's our kids, first and foremost. That's probably how that capacity evolved in the first place, but it can be co-opted for other things, including a beloved pet, let's say. And so those mechanisms, those physiological mechanisms are somewhat plastic. Besides that, why dogs, why more investment now for having fewer kids? If you're an empty nester couple, my parents, when my sister and I long have flown the nest, what do now? They spend a lot of time either indulging animals at zoos, where my mom volunteers, or my dad with a dog on the couch. Watching ESPN. And then younger couples, it's often a starter, you could say. If we're not ready to have a child yet, but let's start with a couple dogs we can take to the dog park together.
Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it. I'm going to go watch Snoopy now.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for us for this semester. We hope you'll join us in the spring semester for our next season of the Research Files. I'm Gary Waddell. Have a great night, and if you're watching this, have a great Christmas.